From the New York Times, black voters drift from Democrats imperiling Harris's bid, poll shows. Dude, this is the New York Times, okay? And so when the media comes out and says, you know, the corporate press, I understand the New York Times, I mean like the Democrat media, MSNBC, no, it's not true, it's not true. It's like, okay, well, I think there's something to that, right? Republicans and there have been a lot of pundits who have said in 2016, Trump's going to win the black vote. He didn't. They said in 2020, he's going to win the black vote. He didn't. There's a lot of support right now, but we're going to wait till Election Day, because I think it's fair to say that the record shows that we may see these signals in the press, but they didn't manifest. To be fair, over the past several cycles, we have seen a massive drift from Democrats of black voters. And what they're reporting now is this is the biggest shift away from Democrats since I think like 1992 or whatever. We have the biggest for the first time since, or actually I think it's going way back. It's maybe like the first time in generations and decades, the Republican Party is now larger than the Democratic Party. There's a saying, I saw this in the Wall Street Journal several years ago, that if the Democrats cannot win at least 80% of the black community, they will lose. And based on the numbers right now, 2024, the Democrats have 78%. So theoretically, if those numbers hold into the election, the Democrats can't win by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know. But you think, so I was on Piers earlier, and Wajahat Ali had made the point that, you know, he made a similar point. We keep hearing that the polls are shifting, but he said it's going to be 88-12 like we saw last time around, even though, and I agreed, because as much as we are seeing a lot of young black men saying they're going to be voting for Donald Trump, the question is, are they just saying this, or are these young people just less likely to vote? It's not a factor of being black. It's a factor of being young. Young people tend not to turn out. You get young people on X like Harry Sisson bragging up a big game about voting for Biden and then Kamala, but then young people still don't turn out. So I'm not entirely convinced, but I'm curious what you guys think.
I think of my home state, Pennsylvania, as an example, and people often forget the right and the left are coalitions of a lot of other different subgroups inside of it. And so Pennsylvania doesn't have that many genuinely like woke people. They exist, but the people in California or New York City who are genuinely really for very progressive social issues. We found from studies they're only between 10 to 15% of America's population. And what happens is if the black vote tilts slightly conservative, and I don't know if it's going to happen this election, but I've noticed a very seismic shift, especially for young black men in their culture towards the right. You can see it with 50 Cent. You can see it with all the red pill influencers like Myron Gaines, Andrew Tate, like Lil Pump's not black, but there's this huge move of conservative rappers. And I have a weird interest in pop culture. This is one of the things people don't know about me, but I was watching this video of this guy who's a Korean, he makes Korean jewelry for rappers, and then one of the Island Boys, and they were debating together, and they were both Republicans. And I thought this would not happen 10 years ago. And so the point I'm trying to summarize here is that the left actually doesn't give that much to most black men. They give it to the black ruling class, and I can explain that point further. And then the black ruling class is able to co-opt the entire population. But if you got even a relative portion of black young men, you would tilt every single state in the Rust Belt hard red, because you look at Pennsylvania, you look at Ohio, you look at Michigan. These are states where the white unions are already went from blue to red. If you got a certain part of the black population, every single state in the Rust Belt would be as red as Texas or South Carolina.
I think that's true. One of the things that gets pointed out a lot this election cycle is that Trump is down among white voters than he was in 2016 and 2020. And so there is obviously a component to this election in particular where courting racial groups is going to be part of it. True of most elections. Trump just has, and this is the Republicans in general right now, has the opportunity to continue to gain among, let's say, black men or the black community at large, among Hispanic voters. And we're seeing these numbers play out, as well as white voters and really secure a victory. This is not true of the DNC, and it's not true of Kamala Harris, in part because of the way they treat different racial groups. I think they're ultimately a very racially motivated party, but not in a way that makes voters feel empowered. And I think that they would never court the white vote the same way that Republicans are more comfortable doing. And so they are dependent on smaller segments of the population, but they don't treat them with respect. And that's, I think, what you're seeing with the fallout of black voters. They, especially the difference between the way black men vote and black women vote, they are motivated by different things. And ultimately, Kamala Harris maybe can appeal to black women, but she is not able to appeal to black men. And so we're getting this large scale scolding, which I don't think will work either, but they have no ability to pivot. And to your point, I think some of that has to do with who's staffed. I think that you're right. A lot of people who are registered Democrats aren't necessarily progressive, but they are sympathetic to progressive causes because of the social acceptance factor. But I think people who staff these campaigns and who are in the White House are much more likely to be radically progressive in their ideology.
Yes.
So they can't relate to moderate middle American voters.
To what degree do you guys think the attempts to attract, the ham-fisted attempts to attract male voters actually turns men off? Because I know
100%.
Yes.
how bad do you think that it's just a little bit, or do you because we're right-leaning people mostly around here. Do you think that it's just the right-leaning people that are kind of like, ooh, we can see how clearly bad that is? Or do you think that normal people that are like politically unaffiliated, or do you think they're like,
Bro,
this actually turns me off?
I was saying that there's a lot of young men, particularly black men, who are saying they're voting for Trump simply because it is cringe to say you're voting for Kamala Harris.
Yes.
It's not even about whether you actually want to vote for Donald Trump or not. It's that if you walk up to your group of guy friends and you're like 20-something and you go, yo, I just voted for Kamala, they're going to bust out laughing, being like, what? That's just like the weirdest thing to say. Saying Trump is basically like saying, like, I'm on the outside, I'm punk rock, basically. It's kind of funny because they don't accept that it is, but when all the major corporations and everyone lines up against them, you're like, yeah, I'm the bad guy, I'm the rebel. And so you want to vote for Trump. They say he's a threat to democracy, J6 and all that stuff. So when they come out with these ads and they got these guys and he's like, I eat carburetors for breakfast. he said carburetor, right? Like, how many guys are fixing carburetors these days? Yo, honest question. What year was the last year cars had carburetors? I get it. Like, farm equipment, I think, still does. When I worked at O'Hare, they have tugs. Tugs have carburetors. But do guys talk about fixing carburetors?
No.
It's like someone Google searched how to be manly from like the 1930s or from the 50s, and they were like, let's just roll with that.
Yeah.
An important thing to keep in mind, and there was a study that said that the average Republican has 3 times as accurate a psychological assessment as the average Democrat than vice versa.
Pardon me?
And so in this study, when they asked Republicans and Democrats to predict the positions the other party had, the right had an assessment of the left's predictions 3 times as accurate as vice versa.
Yes.
And you can discount a single study, but we found this consistently where, and this is dozens of studies, the right is able to understand how the left thinks and not vice versa. And the way I imagine it with the left psychology, and I've made a bunch of videos about the psychology and anthropology behind the right and the left, is you should see the psychology of the people involved as closed emotional circuits where their social networks reward them for being completely emotional and hysterical. And if you're not openly hysterical at minor things, you're a bad person. So there are social networks that make them exceedingly emotional, but they also have these closed logical loops where they're right by definition. So there's no actual interfacing with the world. And so when people talk about the elites being very crafty and having these secret cabals and these transcontinental plans, I think that's true to a certain degree. But also, these are fundamentally not intelligent people. And this is something I've known for years, and it's something that I think we've seen very recently with the stuff where it's just completely obvious. These people have no comprehension of how other people think. And
Oh, right.
They said back in the days and thousands of years ago, a dynasty in decline is ruled by harem girls, eunuchs, and bureaucrats. We are at the harem girl, eunuch, and bureaucrat phase. And
Harem Girls is a good podcast name. I'm going to write it down.
Actually.
And there's multiple Chinese dynasties where the emperor didn't know when the capital was being destroyed. Taiping Rebellion, the emperor was so drugged out of his mind out of opium. He was a weird guy. This is an interesting story I'm not going to get into. Weird guy. He was living in his harem, drugged out in opium, and he had no comprehension that the war was happening. That happened a couple times in Chinese history.
Wow. Yeah, we're there, man. You've got politicians that are gargling nonsense. I think you make a great point. These people have no capability to understand what other people are thinking. And we see that's very indicative of the left. There's a poll, a survey that I like to cite where it shows moderate voters in the United States get 2/3 of their news from the left and 1/3 from the right. Conservatives get 2/3 from the right, 1/3 from the left. And the liberal and left get 95% from the left.
Yep.
They are completely isolated and living in this bubble world. So again, I'm going to reference this because it's fresh in my mind. But when I was on Piers earlier, one thing I didn't get to say to Wajahat Ali, he said, "Oh, Trump is ducking the press. He's ducking the media. He's not going on these shows. Kamala Harris is doing the press. She's doing the adversarial media. She's going on the podcasts." And my response was, right, when she was ahead in the polls, she ducked the media and avoided the podcast. Donald Trump was down in the polls, so he did a bunch of press, even adversarial. He went on various corporate press outlets, much to the chagrin of many of supporters, saying, they're going to lie about you. He's gone on the Nelk Boys. He's gone on our show. He's gone on favorable media as well. And now that he's up in the polls and dominating, he's avoiding the press. Much like Kamala Harris didn't want to do a debate at first, then she did. The polls start shifting, and now it's inverting. Both parties have taken a similar strategy. It is not unique to one side. Now, I can say that because I know that this audience here watching the show is well aware of what Trump has done and what Kamala is now doing, what the strategy there is. But Wajahat, presumably like many of these liberal leftists, consume only MSNBC, CNN, and they're completely unaware of the world around them. They live in a bubble.
I mean, I think that's something that it would be nice if you could convince your liberal friends of. But I feel like the left has and when I say liberal, I mean like more like progressives than liberals. But the left has an emotional reaction about their politics far more than people on the right or even in the center. They believe that the right is evil, which is why you get people saying, "Oh, Trump is Hitler." And now today I've seen people talking about, if Trump dies or if you vote for Trump, you might end up with J.D. Vance. And the implication is J.D. Vance is worse than Trump. But I thought Donald Trump was already super Hitler. So figure it out.
With J.D. Vance, we're up to it's ultra, giga Hitler.
And at some point, people that are not actually leftists have to start addressing the fact that, wait a minute.
They're going to start quantifying units of Hitler. So they're like, well, Trump is mega Hitler, which means that J.D. Vance is going to be giga. And then whoever J.D. Vance picks for his VP, maybe Vivek in the future, will be tera Hitler. Mm-hmm. And then what comes after terabytes?
MAGA Hitler.
Petabytes?
So it's mega Hitler, then MAGA Hitler. MAGA Hitler is the highest level.
Yeah.
There will be no highest because there's always someone next who will be worse.
Yeah, it scales up.
But that's the point. You can only keep the intensity, at a 10 for so long before people start to say, okay, we can't actually respect these opinions because they're just histrionic.
Really. And one of the great innovations that the DNC has not embraced is bringing on a new creative campaign strategist, because right now all of them run the same campaign, and this is true in pretty much every state at every level, which is Republicans are so evil that if you let them anywhere near legislation, they will destroy your lives. And this is true of the state level Republicans, of any Republican governors. Any Democratic strategist is running the same campaign right now, which is why, since Trump is a known quantity, as soon as they announced J.D. Vance was the candidate, they were suddenly like, oh, someone new to fearmonger about. But and I've said it before, I just think that the American public is fear exhausted, and especially in the wake of things like, serious hurricanes that leave people devastated. This appeal to fear doesn't work. And so they're not going to get the same compliance that they're used to.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.